When is a background check bill not a background check bill? We'll find out next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here again with the Constitution Study, where we read and study and teach the rising generation to be free. I'm glad you could join me. As always, follow me, find out more what's going on at the website below, constitutionstudy.com. It's where you can find out everything that we're doing, everything I'm working on, and how, in general, we're educating, reading, and studying everyday Americans. I had a wonderful time last week at the Teach Them Diligently conference. There's actually an article up there to talk about more. I'm going to be in North Georgia in June. So if you're in that area, reach out, check out on the website. We'll find out more. Let's get into today's message. We're talking about H.R. 8, Hotel Romeo 8, colloquially known as the Bipartisan Background Check Act of 2019. Now, first thing you should know, when a bill has the word bipartisan in it, it really means that both parties are going to have their hands in your pockets. You know, it's sad but true. The most dangerous thing in Washington is a bipartisan anything. See, rather than just reading the title, I actually read the legislation, the proposed legislation, and I found a couple things. One is this is not a background check bill. Oh, they call it a background check bills, and it deals with background checks, but this is not. No, it's not a background check bill. It's not a gun control bill. It's not a gun safety bill. It's a bill to control people we don't like. And I know that sounds harsh, and it's the best description I have for this particular type of legislation. You see, if we look at it, and let's take a look here while we're at it. You see, the stated purpose of the bill, the purpose of this act, is to utilize the current background checks process in the United States to ensure individuals prohibited from gun possession are not able to obtain firearms. So the stated purpose is to ensure what we're going to call prohibited persons, because saying people prohibited from gun possession is just too much of a mouthful. We'll call them prohibited persons, but the stated purpose is to ensure prohibited persons cannot obtain firearms. Take a look at the definition of ensure. See, there's nothing in this bill to make certain, sure, or safe to guarantee that people who are prohibited from possessing firearms cannot get firearms. There's nothing there. Nothing. See, most prohibited persons, first of all, if you're prohibited, it's already illegal for you to get firearms. Right? So if you have been adjudicated and part of your punishment is you are no longer allowed to possess a firearm, it's already illegal for you to possess a firearm. And anybody who thinks that making it even more illegal will make any difference is either an idiot or they're trying to sell you something. I mean, it's just not the case. Most prohibited persons do not attempt to purchase their firearms legally. They don't. If you are not allowed to go to own a firearm, are you going to go to a gun store and say, yes, Mr. Gun Store person, sell me a gun I'm not allowed to own. And oh, by the way, let me fill out this form that says you're going to check to see if I can legally own this firearm. And then what? You're either going to lie on the form, which is another felony, or you're going to tell the truth on the form and you're not going to get the gun. It's stupid. Studies show it's easy to bypass the background check system. They use straw purchases where you send somebody else who's not prohibited to buy the gun for you. By the way, that's still illegal, but it still happens. Or they purchase it from other prohibited persons. There's this whole black market in it. This whole idea is idiotic, except for one thing that we'll find out later, which is really the purpose of this legislation, at least what I believe based on what I've read. And if you want more information about how stupid this type of stuff is, do your own research. Now, I recommend, there's a site called crimeresearch.org. John Lott runs that. They have wonderful studies. It's not your sole source, but I do recommend it as a good source. So as I mentioned, I actually read the language of the bill, which guess we weren't supposed to do that because we're just supposed to read the title and say, oh, this is wonderful. We're going to make sure that people who are prohibited from owning firearms won't be able to own firearms. Yeah, except that's not the case. And in fact, I found what I believe are the two actual purposes. I believe there's a twofold purpose in this legislation. Again, I'm not sure. It's not stated that way. And I'm not sure that the people who are supporting this legislation are thinking along that lines. But if you read the actual language, there are two purposes that we'll uncover as we go through this. And neither of which have anything to do with preventing and ensuring that prohibited persons cannot obtain firearms. So let's take a look. All right, constitutionally speaking, Congress has no authority to regulate the purchase, transfer, or possession of arms of any type. The Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I don't know about you, but when I see shall not be infringed, I believe that means it shall not be infringed. It is illegal to infringe that. And just so you don't think I'm talking on my own, Chief Justice Marshall, should this bill become law, it would be void. See, we forget all about Marbury versus Madison. We're told it says that the Supreme Court can overrule Congress, but what Chief Justice actually said is, thus the particular phraseology of the Constitution of the United States confirms and strengthens the principle supposed to be essential to all written constitutions, that a law repugnant to the Constitution is void, and that courts as well as other departments are bound by that instrument. This bill is repugnant to the Constitution because it infringes on the rights of everyday Americans from owning firearms. Notice, I didn't say it infringes on the rights of prohibited persons. It infringes on the rights of everyday Americans, legal, law-abiding citizens, from exercising their right to keep and bear arms for defense of their persons and defense of their state. I find it very interesting that if you look at most legislation today, it's not about punishing the guilty. It seems to be we're going to punish the innocent for the acts of the guilty. And that's really what this bill is doing. And we'll see more as we go through this. See, when I read the legislation, I found it imposes no restrictions on prohibited persons. There is not a word in here that says prohibited persons cannot do this. This bill is targeted at the law-abiding citizen, saying that you can no longer transfer a firearm without government permission. And yes, I took a while to get to that point, but I wanted you to understand this isn't about gun control, traditionally. This isn't about gun safety. This isn't even about making sure prohibited persons don't get their hands on firearms. It says we're going to make it illegal for you to buy or sell private property without government permission. Think about that. You may not like guns. You may say we should prohibit the sale of guns. Fine. What happens when that comes to the sale of books? What happens if that comes to the sale of access to the internet? What happens when that comes to what you're allowed to say on Facebook or Twitter? What happens when that comes to your own private property, your car, your cash? Is it really any different? So this legislation fails right off the bat its stated purpose. See, it has nothing to do with ensuring prohibited people can't buy firearms. It has everything to do with controlling everyday citizens. See, it says, it shall be unlawful for any person who is not a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, or licensed dealer to transfer a firearm to any other person who is not so licensed unless a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, or licensed dealer has first taken possession of the firearm for the purpose of complying with subsections. In other words, it would be illegal for you to sell, buy, loan, give a firearm unless you or the other person is licensed by the federal government. Again, stop and think about that for a second. We're talking about the federal government determining who can act in normal, not just commerce. I mean, who could imagine they're telling you what you can do with your private property, and they're taking your right to do this without due process of law. Oh yes, there's a process. They passed a law, but it's not due process because it's not protecting your rights. Congress has no authority, zero, none, zilch, to regulate commerce that occurs within a state. See, they're not just saying, well, you can't sell it interstate. You might make a case that they could do that. But Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 is known as the Commerce Clause. It says, it's in the context of Congress. Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. And just to be complete, commerce is, in a general sense, an interchange or mutual change of goods, wares, productions, or property of any kind between nations or individuals, either by barter or by purchase and sale, trade, or traffic. Congress has zero authority to regulate any commerce that remains within a state. But here, they're telling you, if you go down to your local, forget the local, you go to your neighbor and you want to lend them a gun. You want to give a gun to a family member as a gift or to a friend. I've had a friend give me a gun that you have to get the government's permission to do so. This is so offensive to a free people. It makes me sick. When I read through this, it was one thing. As I digested this, it simply makes me sick. Because not only do we have the government saying, you can't do with your property what you want as long as, I mean, it's one thing to say, no, you can't sell it to a prohibited person, a person who's been legally found unable to possess a firearm. They're saying, no, you can be legal on all sides. You need government permission. You need to go to a federally licensed individual. They need to take possession of your firearm, meaning they have to take it from you. Then they have to do a background check to see if the person you want to give it to is eligible. You need government permission to buy and sell. Imagine if you needed government permission to go down to the car dealership and buy a car. Or to look at your grocery. What if you went down to the grocery store and there was a government official that looked at your checkout receipt and said, you know what? You don't really need those Oreo cookies. We don't think you should have those. You're too fat. You should be prohibited from buying that stuff. That's not good for you. This isn't really that different. It's just guns, and people tend to get a little antsy about guns. See, this bill is repugnant. It deals with intrastate commerce, not just interstate commerce. It deals with infringing on the right to keep and bear arms. It deals with the non-commercial transfer of property. It is repugnant to the Constitution, and it should be void. And if we had a government system that actually worked, that actually followed the Constitution, if this got through either house of the legislature, the other house would shoot it down, the president would shoot it down, the courts would stand up and say, no, this is repugnant to the Constitution, it is void. And guess what? You shouldn't follow it. Look at my article on Marbury or my episode on Marbury versus Madison about what really happens with judicial review and how it's supposed to work. All right, so while the stated purpose is to ensure that prohibited persons cannot obtain guns, there is a rather significant loophole. See, paragraph 1 shall not apply to a law enforcement agency or any law enforcement officer, armed private security professional, or member of the armed forces to the extent the officer, professional, or member is acting within the course and scope of employment and official duties. Isn't it interesting? Government agents are exempt. If you're a law enforcement officer, a member of the military, or if you happen to work in a profession that the government uses, like private security, Well, then you can trade guns as part of what you're doing. Yeah, absolutely. We figure you're blessed because, well, you're part of the government or you wear a badge. Does somehow putting a badge on somebody magically make them a good person? Don't get me wrong. People who wear the badge, people who are in law enforcement, people who are in the military, they do a tremendous job, and the vast majority of them are good, honest people doing a good, honest job. But putting on a badge or putting on a uniform does not automatically make you perfect. There are bad apples in law enforcement. There are bad apples in the military. Otherwise, we wouldn't need things like internal affairs and inspector generals to check on the people who are enforcing our laws. But what's interesting is they go on and say, oh, well, if you happen to be a private security professional, you mean if I get a job as a security guard, suddenly I'm trusted? Suddenly I'm beyond question as long as I'm doing it within my job, you see. Now, maybe they're saying, well, see, these people, police officers, military, security guards, they've gone through a background check. Millions of Americans have gone through background checks. I've gone through multiple background checks. Why am I not trusted? Why, if I don't have a badge, am I not trusted? Why, if I don't wear a uniform, am I not trusted? Because the government wants to impose this on the citizens, but not on them. You see, those in the government, they use the police, and they command the military, and they use private security, and they don't want to make their life more difficult. See, if it was about background checks, then why exempt private security? Why can we only trust government officials to do these things? Could it be we found the first real purpose of this bill? To further the imbalance of power between the government and the citizens they're supposed to work for? To make it harder and more painful for everyday, ordinary citizens to exercise their right to protect themselves, to protect their families, and to protect their states? Could that be? Could the real purpose be just to make it harder for Americans to stand up to a tyrannical government? Maybe that's the first reason. I think that's the first real reason behind this. Is that it's not that they don't want guns in the hands of prohibited persons. They don't want guns in anybody's hands. They want to make it harder. They want to prevent us from exercising our rights, because if we could defend ourselves, we might just stand up to them one day. Listen to my episode on the Battle of Athens. Check that out on the website. So you remember James Madison in Federalist 46. Beside the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, the existence of subordinate governments to which the people are attached and by which the militia officers are appointed forms a barrier against the enterprise of ambition more insurmountable than any which a simple government of any form can admit. Notwithstanding the military establishments of the several kingdoms of Europe, which are carried as far as the public resources will bear, the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. That's it. The people are afraid that we're armed because we might stand up to them. We might realize that the government works for us, not the other way around, and we may make their life difficult. See, I find it interesting, if you look through history, almost every subjugation of a people has started with the confiscation of their firearms. We're going to get more into that a little bit later. This bill is not about ensuring prohibited persons. It's about making sure that the government gives you permission before you transfer a firearm. They don't want you to have a gun without their permission. They don't want you to exercise one of your rights without their permission. And I ask you, if they don't want you to exercise one of your rights without their permission, how long before they don't want you to exercise other of your rights without their permission? I have articles in the queue. I don't have enough hours in the day of public officials who want to say what rights you can and cannot exercise. They want the permission to tell you what rights you're allowed to exercise. So going on, let's see. Paragraph 1 shall not apply to a transfer that is a loan or a bona fide gift between spouses, between domestic partners, between parents and their children, between siblings, between aunts or uncles and their nieces or nephews, or between grandparents and their grandchildren. Oh, great. Now Congress is going to decide who is a family member, or at least who is a family member close enough to actually trust to share your gun with. See, I can loan my gun to my aunt or to my uncle, but you know who's not listed here? My cousin. I mean, I can't lend it to my cousin? I can lend it to my aunt, who could then lend it to my niece, but I can't lend it to her directly? And by the way, what about step relations? What about my stepbrother? What about stepsister? Again, Congress is trying to pass a law to tell you where and when you can exercise your right and with whom. And it's pure, I mean, it's pure and simple. It's as plain as a wind-driven snow. It's obvious. Let's see, where are we? Number 2, paragraph shall not apply to D, a temporary transfer that is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm, if the possession by the transferee lasts only as long as the immediately necessary to prevent the imminent death or great bodily harm. Only during an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm. Does that mean if we're walking down the street and all of a sudden we are attacked by ruffians and we're in the middle of a gunfight, then I can lend you a gun, and as soon as the gunshot stop, you have to give it back to me? Because that's what it means to be an imminent threat. Right? I have a concealed carry permit. I've studied this. For a threat to be imminent, it must mean now. Right? We're not talking about maybe a disgruntled employee who threatens to come in and shoot the place up. That is not an imminent threat by law. A spouse that has a protective order is not an imminent threat. An imminent threat means it's happening now. So this is all but useless. It basically means, like I said, if we are in a location and a fight breaks out and there's an imminent threat of death, then I can lend you a gun. But as soon as that threat stops, I have to take that gun back. And if I don't, we're both felons. Is that a reasonable restriction to put on your gun rights? Well, according to some in Congress, it is. Paragraph 1 shall not apply to a transfer that is approved by the Attorney General under Section 5812 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1786. Oh, great. If you happen to know somebody who knows somebody in the AG's office, you can get your transfer approved. Isn't that special? Nice to know that if you know someone in the government, you get your skids greased. It's nice to know that just as before, the rules don't apply to those in government the way they apply them to everybody else. This is disgusting, folks. This is terrible. This is awful. Paragraph 1 shall not apply to a temporary transfer if the transferor has no reason to believe that the transferee will use or intends to use a firearm in a crime or is prohibited from possessing firearms under state or federal law, and the transfer takes place and the transferee's possession of the firearm is exclusively at a shooting range or in a shooting gallery or other area designated for the purpose of target shooting. While reasonably necessary for the purpose of hunting, trapping, or fishing, if the transferor has no reason to believe that the transferee intends to use the firearm in a place where it is illegal and has no reason to believe that the transferee will comply, or has reason to believe that the transferee will comply with all licensing and permit requirements for such hunting, trapping, and fishing, or while in the presence of the transferor. Oh, so the government will be nice, and if we go down to the shooting range, and I'm pretty sure you're not a prohibited person, and I'm pretty sure you're not going to do anything bad, as long as you're in my presence, I can loan you a gun. Or if we go out hunting, as long as you're in my presence, I can loan you a gun. As long as I'm pretty sure you're a good guy or a good gal, and I'm pretty sure you're going to follow the rules and that you're going to do all the licensing. Is this really a reasonable restriction? place these types of restrictions on another right. Imagine you were allowed to exercise. I could allow you to post on my website if we did it in the right place, and if I was sure you weren't going to say anything bad, and if you had the right permits for what you were doing. Would you stand for it? This is an enumerated, constitutionally protected, unalienable right, shall not be infringed. And all we see here is infringement on top of infringement on top of infringement. The government wants to require you to get their permission to share your guns on a hunting trip. What does this do to keep prohibited people from getting guns? Absolutely nothing. Nothing in this language will prevent a criminal or someone intent on doing harm from getting a gun. All it does is infringe on the rights of law-abiding citizens. This is nothing but the government assuming a power to determine when it will allow you to exercise your rights, to engage in a legal pastime, to engage in your own self-defense, both from criminals and from the government itself. This is a power they are not legally authorized to wield, and we must punish them for trying to usurp our rights. Not simply shoot this down. We need to find the people that are sponsoring this, and we need to let them know they've done wrong, and we're gonna punish you for it. You've lost votes. You've lost power. We need to take power away from them before they steal all of our rights from us. Regulations promulgated under this paragraph may not include any provision placing a cap on the fee licensees may charge to facilitate transfers in accordance with this paragraph. Oh, so when you go to a gun dealer, when you go to an FFL, a federally licensed firearm dealer, and you beg permission of the federal government to allow you to share your gun or to sell your gun with somebody else, to share your private property, to do with your private property what you wish as long as it does not harm someone else, there is no limit to what they can charge you to do that. Doesn't that just help the poor? Imagine you have some poor person, they're working day, they keep saying, oh, the poor, oh, we have to help the poor. Well, there's some poor schmo who's afraid because maybe he lives in a bad neighborhood, maybe someone's made threats against him, he wants to borrow a gun, he doesn't have money to buy a gun, he wants to borrow a gun. Now he's got to go and pay for the transfer, and how much is that going to be? Well, there's no limit. Maybe in his neighborhood, the dealer knows they can make a quick buck, and instead of charging $25, they charge $125. Now the poor guy's got to come up with $125. What about the single mom that wishes to protect her children? Will she have to pay for the permission to borrow a firearm or to buy one from a friend so she can protect herself and her children, maybe from an abusive spouse? Really? This is your idea of protecting the American citizens? This is your idea of protecting their rights? This is disgusting. But there's more. Guess what? There's even more. Nothing in this act or any amendment made by this act shall construe to authorize the establishment, directly or indirectly, of a national firearms registry. Well, phew. They've said this is not going to be used to create a firearm registry. Barnyard substance. There is no way for the government to know if you went through an approved transfer without a registry. It is impossible. How will they know? How will they know? You and Uncle Bob, or Uncle Bob's not a good example. Let's say you and your best friend. How will they know that you went down to the gun store to get the transfer done if there's not a registry? They show up, they do they find that you own a gun. Well, did you follow? We didn't see that you bought this gun brand new. No, I bought it from, my neighbor up the street. Well, did you go through a transfer? Well, yes. Prove it. I don't have to. You see, when you go through the process of a background check, you fill out a form called a 4473, and by law, they're supposed to destroy all the personal information after, I think it's within 30 days after the transfer. They don't know who, they don't know what. They're supposed to destroy that data. Could it be the government is lying to you? Could it be that they're not destroying that data when they're supposed to? Could it be that they're going to bypass the system and go and say, well, where did you go? None of your business. I followed the law. Well, we don't think you did. Well, prove it. So they take you to jail. Because under suspicion that you violated this law. Until you finally tell them, oh yeah, I went down to John's gun shop. We did the transfer. And then they go to John's gun shop. They said, show us the 4473s. Because John's gun shop is required to keep them. See, here's the second real purpose of the bill. It's an excuse for a national firearm registry. First, they're going to use this as an excuse to go back and to get your 4473s with your personal information about all your transfers. Then they're going to say, this is inefficient. We can't enforce this law. We need a national firearm registry in order to do this. And folks, every government tyrannical takeover, every time the government has subjugated a people, it has included the registration and eventual confiscation of firearms. This isn't hyperbole. This is history. Look it up. This is a violation of your rights. This is a violation of not just your rights to keep and bear arms. It's the violation of your private property rights. Your private property is no longer your private property. The government said, this property, you need our permission in order to buy and sell. If they can do it for some private property, why not for others? Why not? You see, the only reason the Congress can get away with this type of legislation is because of the apathy of the American people. There is no power delegated to Congress to enact such legislation. None. It is illegal. It should be void. Every department, every state, every sheriff, every court should look at this and say, no, this is wrong. We will not enforce it. Yet a majority of Americans, including gun owners, are just going to stand by and watch our rights torn up and thrown away. Our Constitution uses toilet paper in the hands of these men and women, and we're just going to sit by and go, oh, well, what can we do? This is not just about the Second Amendment, folks. If you're not a gun person, fine. What about the basic idea of separation of powers between state and federal government? The federal government has no authority to control commerce that remains within a state. It is interstate commerce that Congress has authority over. Yet here we go, they're going to control it. They're going to establish laws that have no federal authority. They're going to blow through the Commerce Clause. Well, it might happen interstate. Fine. If it's interstate, then deal with interstate. Intrastate, I'm sorry, but it's time for the states to stand up and tell the federal government, no. This is our realm. These are our citizens. Hands off. It's time for us to talk to our sheriffs and say, hey, Mr. Sheriff, Mrs. Sheriff, will you protect us from an encroaching federal government because they are after us? It's a violation of our equal protection under the law because the basic idea that certain people and certain rights get protection and others don't is wrong. We are supposed to be equal under the law. That means if I own a gun, my rights to my property are exactly the same as if I don't own a gun. The change in property doesn't change that. If we don't hold our elected officials accountable, if we don't remind them, you work for us, we shouldn't be surprised when they propose this legislation. We haven't held them accountable for decades. It's time we stop letting them get away with this nonsense. It's time there be consequences for the men and women who claim to represent us in Congress when they stand up and they vote for this nonsense, when they vote for this garbage. It's time for them to pay a price. Maybe if they thought they might pay a price for taking away our rights, they'd be a little less eager to do so. See, this is about regulating everyday Americans. It's not about insuring prohibited persons, because there's nothing in here that says, oh, see, prohibited persons, we're going to make sure they really, really can't. There's nothing in here that does that. This is about controlling you and me. And if they can do it to the gun owner, then they're going to do it to the internet. Then they're going to do it to whatever else they don't like. They do it to raw milk now. You see, if we don't protect the rights of others, they eventually come for our rights. So if you don't own guns and you don't think this is such a bad idea, imagine what you do. Imagine your right to speech. Imagine your right to property being treated this way. Just because you may not have a vested interest in what other people are doing, doesn't mean you shouldn't protect their rights, because those are the same people that one day you may ask to protect your rights. You see, I thought we lived in a free country. I thought we lived in a nation where everyone can do what they wanted as long as they didn't infringe on the legitimate rights of others. Yet we have the government saying, no, you need our permission to transfer firearms. We already have the government saying, you need our permission to build, you need our permission to own land, you need our permission. It's just another one. See, Congress doesn't think we live in a free country. Congress thinks Congress thinks we are their subjects, that we must do whatever they think up. They have become an aristocracy. And we calmly and quietly sit here and take it. See, they think you live in their country rather than the other way around. It's our country. We the people. We created the federal government. It's time we get it back under control. Stop waiting for the federal government to get itself under control. That's ridiculous. It's time for the American people to get our country back under control. And if we don't, we will be sorry. Because as long as we let them do whatever they want, they will punish us when we misbehave. And because we won't punish them when they misbehave. So as you see, I got just a little bit excited by all of this. This is a big deal. This is not simply, oh, well, it's guns and we really don't want to have bad people having guns. You know what? I admit there are certain people that I think should not be in possession of firearms. But I don't think the government has the right to tell me what I can do with my firearms because, well, there's somebody who might do something bad with it. It's ridiculous. And it's time we stop putting up with it. It's time we remind the feds they work for us, not the other way around. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you saw that there's more to this legislation than meets the eye. It's certainly more than the title says. The title rarely has anything to do with what the legislation actually does. So read it, understand it, maybe talk to your sheriff, maybe talk to your state rep, certainly talk to your rep and senator if you can. But it's another reason why it's important to read the original documents. So again, I hope this got you fired up. I hope it made you think. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. And I also hope you'll head to the website, constitutionstudy.com. I hope to see you again next time on the Constitution Study. Have a great day.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line